Well, hello everyone and welcome to another very exciting episode here on the MI Gardener channel. Today's episode is going to be a complete guide to patio gardening. It's going to be everything that you're going to need to have a successful patio garden all in one video, so I know you all are going to enjoy it. Before we get started, I want to mention that this episode is being sponsored by EcoScraps. EcoScraps is a company that partners with restaurants and grocery stores to reduce the waste that would normally be going to a landfill. Every single year, over 30 million tons of food scraps gets thrown into a landfill, and that's from America alone. This takes up about 1/5 of every landfill. So you look at a landfill, 1/5 of that is stuff that can be composted and turned into compost and plant food for your garden. So what EcoScraps is doing is they're eliminating the stuff that would normally go to a landfill, they're composting it down, and they're turning it into beautiful bagged soil and fertilizer for your plants. This not only keeps millions of tons of organic matter out of our landfills, but it helps to create a sustainable product to feed your garden. And what's better is the fact that it helps to reduce dangerous methane gas, which has been shown to be the #1 cause of global warming. To start out this patio growing guide, what we want to talk about first is pot size. The pot size can make or break a successful patio garden because if you go too small, the plants are going to be root bound and stressed and they're not going to produce well. And go too big and it's really not going to be very effective because you're going to be lugging around soil and you're really going to be growing in more than you actually need. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through our different pots here, and we have different pots lined up in kind of the orientation that we want to present them in on our patio. And we're going to start with this large pot here. This large pot is about 3 gallons or so, 3.5 gallons, and it's going to be perfect for a single tomato plant. So we're going to plant our patio tomatoes in that pot there. And you're probably wondering, why are you going to be using such a large pot for a single tomato? And that's because while the tomatoes are very small right now, they're actually going to grow, and you don't want to have to transplant, you don't have to be moving stuff around, so it's best to actually foresee how big it's going to get and then just leave it there. So that's why we're using such a big pot for such a small plant. Now the next pot that we're going to use is the next smallest down. This is about 2.5 gallons, and this pot is going to be perfect for our Brussels sprouts. We have our Brussels sprouts right here, and you can plant about 3 Brussels sprouts in this container. And that might be a little bit tight, so you can go 2, but I always prefer high intensity gardening, so I would do 3, and you're gonna get a lot of bang for your buck that way. Now the next pots down that we're going to talk about are the smaller pots here. These are about 2 gallons, no more than 2. And what you're going to do is you're going to plant stuff that has very shallow root systems, because this is much too small to grow anything with a deep root system. You want to keep like your peppers in this container or the larger one. You want to keep your tomatoes in the larger one. Potatoes I would keep in this large one here. So you really don't need a large pot to grow pretty much anything you want. It's just based on how much space you have and the stuff you want to grow. So in these smaller pots here, we're going to plant our lettuce and our muscalin mix. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is clay versus plastic. A lot of times people, they want a terracotta. Terracotta is clay, and then they want plastic. So the first pot we're going to talk about is the clay pot. Clay pots are great if you're home all the time and you can keep up on your watering. The reason why I say that is because, especially in a small pot that's clay, they heat up fast in the summertime. So if your summers get above probably 85, 90 degrees, you do not want to use clay because it's actually going to bake the roots. The next thing you don't want to do is you don't want them to dry out. Clay has a tendency to wick away water because it's very porous. And that's great for plants that like a little more arid, like some of your herbs like rosemary or thyme. Those are great plants to put in clay pots for that reason. But if you're not home to water all the time, I would not recommend putting something like a salad mix in there or beans or something that you can grow in a shallow clay pot like this, because they're just going to overheat and they're going to over dry. Now the benefit to using plastic is that the plastic actually is kind of an insulative barrier. The plastic does not wick away water like the clay does, so it's going to hold on to that water a little bit longer. So if you happen to go away for a day or two, it's not going to dry out. And also the fact that the plastic pots are typically a little bit cheaper, and also the fact that they're a little bit lighter as well. So if you're someone that does not have the strength to lug around heavy pots, plastic is going to be a great alternative for you, and they last just about as long. You do want to replace the pots about every 3 years because the sun will begin to crack these and they'll begin to just kind of fade a little bit. So it's smart to replace them just if you want to keep them up in nice condition. So that's that. Now let's talk about actual planting up your plants. So when talking about the right soil to use in a patio garden, I always stress a good quality potting specific soil. You don't want to go with a bagged soil that's just kind of topsoil or bagged compost. You want to make sure that it's a potting specific soil because of the fact that potting soil has other components added to it that's going to make it favorable for your plants. You don't want to use a topsoil because it's going to compact down. You want to use something that's going to have like perlite and vermiculite, and it's going to stay very loose and it has good porosity. And porosity basically just means the ability to hold on to just the right amount of moisture. You want it to be soft and fluffy as well. As we always say, the best soil is the fluffiest soil, because what that's going to do is it's going to prevent the compaction that's going to be found in your pots. Because oftentimes in nature there's earthworms and there's fungi and bacteria that help to keep that soil nice and loose. However, in a pot, that's not as easy to find, and so you're going to find that as you water, the soil will begin getting harder and harder and harder. And what happens is something called caking, and it kind of cakes up at the top and your plants actually get choked off. And so it's just smart to start with a good potting soil that's never going to cake. What makes the EcoScraps potting mix so nice for a patio garden is their combination of coconut coir, perlite, bark chips, and compost. This makes sure that the mix is very loose, never compacts no matter how hard you squeeze it, and it's going to hold on to just the right amount of moisture. Everything you want to look for in a potting mix. We're just filling up our first container for the tomato. All right, we're going to plant our first plant, the Patio Princess tomato. We're gonna pot that up there. This will be good. Should add a little more soil around the base because you always want to compensate for settling. As you water, the soil will compact down a little bit and fill in all the little air gaps that exist in that soil there. So there you go. Okay, on to the next pot. Now with the Brussels sprouts, what I want to do is I kind of want to make a triangle pattern here so there's even spacing. That way they're not going to be too crowded out, even though once they're fully grown, they'll be fairly crowded. Okay. There we go. Now with the Musclein mix, it's very important to fill the pot all the way up to the top, because what you're not going to do is you're not going to be burying anything. You're going to be putting the seeds pretty much right on the top of the soil. And what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called high intensity gardening. That's what I love to do because you get a lot of bang for your buck. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically plant tons and tons of seed. And that's going to ensure that we're not going to have just one plant or two plants. We're going to have hundreds here, and we're going to do what's called cut and come again. And that basically means that as the plant grows, we're just going to take little leaves, because there's no reason to grow fully mature heads. It's just not, it's not conducive for a successful patio garden. And so we're going to seed these in here very densely, and if we have to thin, we can. I just want to make sure that I get the right amount of seeds here, so as they grow up, it'll be a thick mat of greens, and then you can just come through here and snip the greens, and you're going to get way more in your square footage based on this planting method. All right, and with lettuce, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to put all of our seeds into our hand, and we're going to gently sprinkle all the seeds right onto the top of the soil. Now, you don't have to use all the seed because that might be a little bit too dense, but I'd probably say a quarter of the packet of seeds. And what this is going to do is going to do the same thing as the Musclein mix. It's going to make sure that we have a nice dense planting of lettuce. And again, you're not harvesting for heads. Harvesting for heads is just not efficient for space. And it's good for a large-scale farm, but when you're just growing on your patio, you're going to get way more bang for your buck and more efficiency out of your square footage. The last thing to do is water them in nice and deep. You want to water them till the water starts running out the bottom of the pot. What that's going to do is going to ensure that your plants are not going to have any transplant shock, because they go through a little bit, especially when you're transitioning from different soil types, and this is going to help to reduce that transplant shock. So before we end, I want to talk about sunlight and fertilizing. Those are both very important components, and without them, you will not have a successful patio garden. So we're going to talk about sunlight first. When it comes to sunlight, you want to make sure that the tomatoes, if that's what you're growing, are going to be getting between 5 and 8 hours of direct sun. That's basically what we're getting right now, is that direct sun. If it's something that's being filtered through, that's not direct. So between 5 and 8 hours of direct sun is required to grow nice tomatoes. Same thing with peppers, potatoes, zucchini, things like that. Basically, the larger the plant gets, the more energy it needs. And since plants get their energy from the sun, you get what I'm saying. You need more sunlight, more energy, bigger plant. So the next step down is about 4 to 6 hours of sun, and that's going to be able to grow your collard greens, your broccoli, your kale, and your Swiss chard, things like that, that don't get super large but still need some energy to produce. Then comes down to the next step down that I absolutely love. That is things that require between 3 and 4 hours of direct sun, and they're still going to grow. These are things like basil, thyme, rosemary, some of your lettuces and spinach. Those are going to do great in low light conditions. Now, if you have anything less than 3 hours, I don't think it's quite possible. But again, most people have at least 3 to 4 hours. So I'd highly suggest checking out how much sunlight your patio gets. You can get a light meter, or you can time it from the moment the sun actually reaches your porch, the time it leaves your porch, and that's going to give you a rough estimate of how much sunlight you're going to get on your plants. The last thing I want to talk about is fertilizer. Without fertilizer, your plants are dead. You could have the right type of pots, the right type of soil, and water on a very regular basis, and your plants still are going to need food. What's really nice about this potting mix is the fact that there's actually compost and nutrients in the mix, so that you don't have to fertilize some of your very fast turnaround vegetables. Some of the stuff like lettuce and spinach, they're only going to take between 30 and 40 days to mature, so you don't need to fertilize those, which is great. That's less work. Then what you want to do is you want to go up a notch to your your brassicas, your cold weather crops. These are the Brussels sprouts, so they're in that same category: kale, broccoli, cauliflower, stuff like that. You're going to want to fertilize just once because they take about 60 days to mature, and you're not going to need to fertilize any more than that in order to get them to maturity. Now it comes to the heavy feeders. These are the big knockout punchers here when it comes to fertilizer. You want to fertilize them once every month. And the reason is because they take a long time to mature and they take up a lot of nutrients to grow. So by feeding them once a month, you're going to get them through to maturity. They're going to do great, and they're not going to show any signs of nutrient deficiency. So there you go. There is a complete patio growing guide. I hope you all enjoyed. I highly recommend growing stuff on your patio. It is often a place that gets left barren, and there's so much growable space that you can grow food for your family, beautiful flowers, whatever you want to grow. But I would suggest using that space. And so hopefully you all enjoyed. Hopefully you all are growing bigger going home. And I want to give a big thank you to EcoScraps again. I'm going to post links to where you can check out their potting mix in the description box below. And I'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.